So it was a nice occasion, a little bit a light outing after the retreat period. One idea was they wanted to show Ajahn Sudhirwa the tigers there. The tigers are legendary lore in the Thai forest tradition. So many of the great Kuba Ajahns encountered tigers those days when Thailand was still covered by thick forests and tigers roaming freely. Anyway, being an Aussie, I rather had the echidna encounter during the tiger demonstration, because there was a timing clash, but I really like that in Australia Zoo they're doing these close encounters with the animals. So feeding the echidna with this paste which I have prepared, Bella the echidna, even had a name. And she's got this long tongue, you can lick this ground insects or what they're using there from your finger. And very cute. But I went to the tigers before the show, and I was lucky, the tiger was just lying against the glass. And there's a big, very thick plexiglass, and he was lying there and resting, but he turned the back to me. So I was waiting for quite some time, but in the end he managed to directly look at me. I put the photo on our website. I'm very happy with that photo because it really is this intent look. It looks more like he's trying to figure out what I am, or maybe he's not used seeing monks or something. It looks like he's not quite sure what is this guy. Apparently what Steve Irwin said is that if someone touches an animal, the animal will touch their heart, and then they become automatically a conservationist for that animal. They will want to protect it. And I like that kind of spirit. You can feel that is the energy, the vibes there. People working there tend to be very happy, looking after animals, introducing the visitors to animals. They do a lot of educational stuff, how to protect different animal species. And I think the basic philosophy of having people meeting that animal, interacting, to get an emotional connection, I think is a good approach. In the end, you can't do it just by trying to introduce laws to protect nature if people don't have any love for nature and animals. I also have a very nice photo of a koala I put there, because he's just sleeping on his back with the arms and legs all over the place. And he looks so funny. And again, they're allowed to go really close up under the guidance of the keepers. No, they don't allow you to just mess around with the animals. But even without any extra payment, there was an opportunity to pat the koalas a little bit on the back towards the bottom. This is where they're least sensitive, because they're designed, they have this thick skin where they usually sit in the what do you call it, the fork between and for most of the animals, I had a feeling that they are quite happy, and they are having the revolving rosters. It's not like the one animal gets overexposed to humans. And I put these photos up, one YouTube video of me petting the animal. Ajahn Dhammasiha did that quite nicely, a kangaroo. Because it's part of the Dhamma to have loving kindness to animals. And I'm not aware whether any other religion is teaching that so clear and unambiguously like the Buddha. Now, for example, the 5 precepts, that the first precepts against killing, without any when and if or what unambiguously includes animals. And there's quite a stark contrast to Christianity. I noticed that by chance somewhere in a discussion about this Charlie Kirk assassination, when all the gun experts and ballistic experts chimed in what kind of gun has been used, and then the hunters commenting, and then the other comments suddenly starting talking about the hunting is not good and you shouldn't kill animals, and many people then defending the hunters and arguing that these animals have been given by God to us to enjoy as we please, and similar things. So it's one thing I very much appreciate about the Buddha's teaching. And it's interestingly that in India at the time when the Buddha lived, it was still very common, even for the Brahmins, to slaughter cattle for big sacrifices. And even in the Hindu tradition, that is kind of acknowledged that this teaching of complete non-violence, including animals, came really strongly with the Buddha only. So please be kind to animals, and that is to all animals. We have one book here in the library, I think it's called Eating Animals. This is an American guy who wrote a little book about the meat industry and the torture animals have to endure in order then to be eaten by us, and encouraging people not to participate in that. And he gave one example when he visited in Berlin. They had this little polar bear cub, I think Knut, his name was Knut, I think. He became an Instagram star and he was so popular. And everyone loved little Knut. But then people would go out and buy their Big Mac and would buy their curry sausage, and they wouldn't see any relationship between these things. And so often we have great love for a cute cat, for a nice dog, but we may not be thinking of cane toads and mozzies and ants and termites and so on with compassion. And just like with human beings, we are encouraged to make our metta unlimited, boundless. So similar for animals, whether it's an ugly cane toad or a cute koala, we try to have loving kindness and compassion for all animals. There's an amazing story in Udana. You may have heard of the big argument in the Sangha when the monks in Kosambi were quarreling. They were led to almost like a split in the Sangha, and the monks were so angry at each other that when the Buddha went there personally to admonish them, this is when he spoke this well-known gatha, which we also have hung up near the Agasala, that hatred can never be overcome by hatred. Only non-hatred can overcome hatred. Only loving kindness, forgiveness, compassion, these kind of qualities can overcome hatred, but not anger itself. This is actually gatha he spoke to the monks. But the monks, even after the Buddha 3 times admonished them, they would just say, Bhante, you just live happily enjoying samadhi and solitude, and we sort out this argument ourselves. They didn't listen even to the Buddha. And then after the Buddha spoke these gathas, he retired alone into the Padi Laya forest. And interestingly, he met an elephant, a big elephant, male tusker, who had also retired. and they were in a similar situation. Because the big male elephant lived in the herd, and the young elephants, when he went to the river and to the brook for drinking, they would go upstream and drink upstream from him, so he gets all the disturbed water with the mud. And he would walk through the forest to break off the branches to eat. And the other elephants would walk in front of him and break off the nicest branches in front of him. And because he was a very strong, powerful elephant, whenever he went bathing, all the female elephants came up and started rubbing their bodies against him. And he didn't like that either. So he decided, no, why do I endure all that? Living crowded in the herd, and let me just go and live alone in the forest. And then he met the Buddha, and the Buddha, with his psychic power, mind reading, he could read the elephant's mind. And he could see that the elephant was thinking very similar to the Buddha, because the Buddha was also practicing simply letting go and equanimity. And when people don't listen to him, even monks, he's obviously not starting to fight or anything. This is a difference of someone who has no more attachments, has no more anger, has no more conceit. But then you just let go. This is one way how you can notice in your own life whether you are coming from true compassion or whether you're coming from egoistic interest when you tell anything to other people. If you come from pure compassion and then others don't listen to you and continue maybe something that is harmful to them, you may feel somewhat sad about it, but you wouldn't get angry. And when you notice you can't get through, then you just drop it and let go. However, if it's actually our own egoistic interests, it's not really about the other person, then usually we get angry and we don't let go, and then we start fighting over it. Evang nagasa nagena isa dantasa hatina sameti chitang chitena yo eko ramati vano. As a Gatha, the Buddha spoke to the elephant. One naga to the other naga. Naga in Pali means the serpent spirit, first of all, a class of devas in the first Deva Loka. It seems to be the same, what they call a dragon in Chinese culture, or probably also similar to the dragon in old Western culture. But the term can also be used for an elephant, particular big, powerful tusker. And by extension, it can also be used to any very powerful being. So the Buddha said, from one naga to the other naga, the tusker elephant, and then the Buddha as the powerful naga. Isadantasa this is a naga which has got teeth like plowshares. Sameti chitang chitin, their mind is in complete agreement. They have a harmonious mind, the same idea that they delight solitary in the forest. And then the elephant looked after the Buddha for that vasa, and apparently he would clear out the place under the tree where the Buddha was sitting from the grass. Big anumodana to you guys who are doing the slashing here in Queensland. You know how much work it is to get the grass down. Here the Buddha had an elephant doing it, and the elephant would also bring water in his trunk. And I have sufficient faith that I take the story literally. I believe it happened actually like that. There's many stories throughout history about elephants worshipping stupas. One recent one is Somavati stupa in Sri Lanka. I had never been there, because when I lived in Sri Lanka, they had the war with the Tamil terrorists, and that area was in the war zone, and one couldn't really go there. So the stupa was not really looked after. And then later, when the war ended, And people started going there, and then reports came in that they had elephants coming, and I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but sometimes they circumambulate. And we can also read that in the reports of the Chinese pilgrim in ancient Buddhist India. There's also stories like that happening. And there's a story about Dhammagiri Stupa. That is one of the first 8 stupas, one of the original 8 relic shares of the Buddha's relics, and was given to the Koalas, which is the people the Buddha's mother and stepmother came from. The Queen Mahapajapati, his stepmother, and Queen Mahamaya, his mother, were Koalas princesses. So they got one share and they erected Dhammagiri Stupa, which recently has been declared UNESCO World Heritage Site in Nepal nowadays. And they're planning a huge development, which however is meant to leave the actual stupa mound untouched. Is only in a kind of half-collapsed mound, it's not a full stupa, and they want to leave that untouched in the center and then only develop around. May take a long time in Nepal. But there's a story of the Chinese pilgrims, what they were told when they visited there, because they noticed very curiously the abbot of the monastery, big monastery, there was a samanera, a novice. And the history is that some monks got kind of lost in the forest, and then they stumbled upon Dhammagiri Stupa, one of the really very venerable ancient ones, one of the first 8. And it was disused and in ruins. And as it was a full moon night, they saw a group of elephants coming, and they were circumambulating the stupa at night. And one of the monks felt so inspired by that. He felt, now I'm a monk, and these are just elephants, and they're looking after the stupa, and so I should be doing better. And he stayed behind. And because you can't really dig the earth or damage plants as a bhikkhu, he went down to become a novice. They only have 10 precepts, similar to the 8 precepts. And so he could actually remove weeds, and he could disturb the earth, and then he worked to restore the stupa. And then in the end, a big monastery grew up around him, and they got the tradition that the abbot would always be a novice. So these stories are quite common. There are stories of animals worshipping Buddha statues. And the famous last great Chinese monk, Venerable Xu Yun, lineage holder of all the 6 Chinese Zen or chant traditions, and who died at age 120 in the 1950s. And he was reporting that they had a cow come. I don't think it was a cow coming in and then kneeling down in front of the Buddha and crying, and tears coming out of her eyes. And I've seen other similar stories of animals spontaneously doing an act of worship to a Buddha statue. I can particularly imagine elephants, because you may have heard of elephant graveyards. It seems to be the only animal species who has some understanding about deceased elephants and their mortal remains. And they have these so-called elephant graveyards where elephants have died, and they go there and do some... No one knows exactly what they're doing, but it seems to be some kind of ritual or an expression of mourning for the dead elephants. And the stupas usually have relics, which is remains, bodily remains, usually crystallized of Arahants or the Buddha. So one can imagine that if elephants can understand that about their own departed elephants, that they can maybe transfer it to a stupa. Some time ago there was a fascinating story of a woman who was, I think, doing whale research. I'm not sure whether she was a former university researcher or just more private, but she would often be swimming with whales and diving, and never had a problem. And there is one instance, I think it was close to New Zealand, where she was diving with whales. I think it was southern white whale. I'm not quite sure the species, a big one. And she was very surprised because one whale suddenly swam up very close to her. And it was becoming a bit frightening for her. And in the end, he would even almost kind of push her with one of his flippers. And she was very surprised because no whale had ever acted aggressively to her. But as she was then getting slowly back to the boat with the whale pushing her, then they suddenly realized there was actually a white shark. There was a white shark approaching, and the whale was trying to protect her. And there's instances reported that whales were protecting different species of whales, even from shark. This is quite a beautiful thing that a whale is risking the danger they can get attacked themselves to protect not even another whale of the same species, but from a different species. There are stories throughout history of dolphins saving humans. The dolphins have to breathe, so they understand that you have to come up over the surface of the ocean to breathe, and they seem to understand that humans can do that, or that humans have to do that, and they have been many cases throughout history where they did that with shipwrecked humans. I remember we once went whale watching, and it appeared apparent to me that the whales were obviously watching us as well, watching them, but and it's very beautiful because it's a completely voluntary interaction. Whale watching, it's not like the animals are imprisoned, it's completely on their own terms. And obviously they come close to the boat and they have a look at you, stick their head out, and I felt very much that they also did a little display, and in the end when they left, two of them made a final big splurge and then they were gone. Like saying, okay, no, floops. So I think it's good to keep that in mind. YouTube is quite beautiful for that one. There's also amazing animal friendships where sometimes a species where you think that they would never get on become the best of friends. A goose and a dog, or weird combinations. And so we can notice that animals are basically capable of very similar emotions like humans.
Actually, probably did it better than some human.
So there's someone sharing a story of an elephant going into a building which was a shrine room, you say, ne? And doing some worship to the Buddha there. And she was very impressed how careful the elephant was not to trample any of the furniture, and very gracefully backed out again. This is why it's the proverbial bull in the china shop, isn't it? The bull may not be quite so careful. The elephant is a very, I think in terms of wisdom, maybe the top animal, also dolphin.
May I say something?
Please, yeah.
There was he was that person, the elephant. He was reborn as a human being, and he wanted to be ordained.
Oh, amazing story! I haven't heard that one. For the YouTube, fascinating story of apparently a Chinese monk, a highly accomplished Chinese monk, walking in the Laotian forest and getting lost, and then meeting a herd of elephants. And the tusker first protecting him from the younger elephants who started getting aggressive against the monk. And then the tusker elephant also leading him out of the forest. And then even better, years later, when that monk was very old, he had someone coming wanting to ordain, and with his psychic powers he could see that this was actually the elephant reborn as a human. And the monks had also given him a blessing for being saved. He blessed the elephant that may all his aspirations become fulfilled. Yeah, that's a great story. I haven't heard that one. Amazing. Quite a few of Ajahn Mun himself, and then quite a few of his early disciples when Thailand still had lots of forest, and they also went into Laos and Myanmar, and they're reporting things like that. Luang Por Khao was quite well known to have some connection with elephants. They once had an elephant blocking a narrow forest path. And they were a little bit scared, and a small group of monks couldn't really easily pass by what was very thick shrub. But you never know, and elephants can also be aggressive to humans, particularly if they had bad experiences with hunters or being trapped and so on. So Luang Por Khao was talking very gentle to him and called him older brother, using the Thai term for older brother, to flatter him a little bit. And then amazingly, the elephant went a little bit to the side, and he put his tusks into the brush, like indicating that he's not going to attack. And then they just passed by, right next to him. There's also many tiger stories. One night, Luang Por Khao was teaching some of the monks staying with him. They stay in solitary kutis, but then they would often meet at Luang Por Khao's kuti, which is a bit bigger, in the evening, and he would do teaching. And this is these very open, very simply built kutis with bamboo and leaves and so on. There was no much protection, just protection against rain. And while he was teaching there on the open veranda, a group of 3 young male tigers came. And it seems Luang Por Khao was already familiar with them. They seemed to know him, because they just came up and then they started playfully fighting with each other under the kuti. And the monks were sitting there during the Dhamma talk, and they were feeling very, very queasy, because any moment these tigers are already playfully fighting. They may just jump up and kill them all. But Luang Por Khao wasn't afraid. He would only occasionally knock on the floor and tell the tigers to be quieter, because he can't teach the Dhamma. And then they would be keeping quiet for a while, and then they would start playing around again. Ajahn Mun could also read the minds of animals, and if someone is a mind reader, you can also read animal mind. It can be interesting. I notice now, if you live as a Buddhist monk in the monasteries, the animals learn that and they become quite tame. Sometimes not so helpful, like with our birds here, stealing the food. In Australia Zoo, they also have the most poisonous snake in the world, known as inland taipan or fierce snake. It was interesting to see. He doesn't look anything special at all. Doesn't look particularly poisonous or anything. But it's very rare to encounter it, because it just live in desert areas, and they're also very shy. So it's extremely unlikely to get bitten by those. But even here now, I had 2 close snake encounters ever since I lived here, and both were fine. One was when I was on retreat and eating at my kuti, and then afterwards I would go some distance from the kuti to dump the leftover food, and then sometimes birds would come, or sometimes at night I think mice would come. But that must have attracted a snake, that the rats and mice may be going there and eating the leftovers. And when I came, it's a little bit down the hill, and then there's a place where I usually dumped it. And I came quite quickly and emptied the bowl. And when I made this movement, came with the bowl, there was this quite a big snake, and was right next. I almost dumped the bowl onto it, but he just dashed away. And I saw him only the moment he dashed away. I can't even tell exactly what it was because it was so fast. But no, again, he didn't bite me. He dashed away. And there was another encounter which was more amazing still, because I had a long discussion here about snakes and having loving kindness to snakes and not killing them. And one gentleman talked about how he grew up in PNG and his father protected him when he was playing with a rifle, and he would shoot if there any snake or crocodile would come. And he was arguing very much the case that you may have to kill snakes and you have to shoot them and so on. And I was obviously arguing the case to practice metta and to not kill snakes. It became quite a discussion. But I wouldn't budge with my position, because as a Buddhist monk I have to teach what the Buddha teaches. And then right after I went up about 1 o'clock, our driveway, and I walked on the edge of the driveway on the concrete. And again, I didn't see that fellow. And when I set my left foot forward and stepped, I saw just this snake dashing away. He was right next to the road, and I hadn't seen him. And that was amazing because it felt like he was saying hello. Usually there's no snakes around at that time and so close to the road or anything. It was really unusual. That one seemed to be black. Can't say much more because it was so fast again. And very impressive. I felt he was just coming saying, thank you for talking about not attacking and killing snakes. So for the YouTube, the question here is basically, we are making karma only when we have intention. But what about cases of negligence, where our action leads to a negative outcome, like a person trying to remove a grasshopper from a sink without harming him and throwing him into the grass, and that moment a magpie swooping down and eating him, killing him. So I think in the case of the grasshopper, the negligence appears extremely negligent, extremely minimal to me. Now I can't really see much negligence. I mean, there's already a very good intention that you try to get the grasshopper out of danger or being trapped in the sink. And there's an utterly wholesome intention, and you had no idea of exposing that grasshopper to danger. If you take a little child out of a similar situation, then in that situation I think you would expect a higher level of care than for a grasshopper. And if something happens, you just get a child and then you just pop him somewhere. Then I think it's possible to make some karma there due to negligence, but it's a difficult area. I cannot tell you exactly what kind of negligence will give what kind of karma. I think at some stage you can say the negligence is so strong that it is kind of intentional. You make a kind of decision of, no, I just don't bother. And in that sense, there's kind of intention.
Because I see a higher level of negligence in those kind of situations.
Yeah, and I would recommend using the torch anyhow because of the snakes. If you step accidentally on the slugs, so they are taking some risk there straight away for their negligent karma. It's a tricky one. We can have that here when it rains and driving up the driveway at night. It's almost impossible to drive it up sometimes without killing a cane toad. But then, what are you going to do? To just don't drive. So I cannot give 100% guidance. You have to look into your mind. I mean, there have been cases for people speeding extremely. Someone is going 150 in the 50 zone, and then they crash and kill someone. Now, what is that? it's not murder because it's not premeditated, intentional killing. But it may be, what is the next one down? Manslaughter. But manslaughter usually also needs intention, and you can say they didn't intend. But I think the courts have decided cases like that on manslaughter, because if you decide, I go, this is obviously intentionally, you may be unintentionally going 60 in a 50 zone. You're just a little bit negligent and not so careful with your speed. But if you go 150 in a 50 zone, there's obviously a very deliberately intentional decision. And in a sense, you obviously have the intention that I'm doing that, never mind if I risk other beings' welfare and life even. And I think that is a form of negligence where you can say that this has an intentional aspect. And then if something happens, I don't think you get out of it by saying, I didn't have an intention to kill someone.
No, it's been a long time, so there's no references in the sutras to...
Can't think of anything offhand. I think that concept is quite good, reasonable duty of care, and you make a deliberate, intentional decision to abandon that. I'm not sure whether it extends to the slugs of someone walking without a torch. I mean, you have to look at all the circumstance. Maybe they forgot bringing the torch from their kuti. It's a difficult one. I mean, we start off with anything where we truly have intention. I sometimes don't know what to do and say, if some insects fall into the toilet, it's not so much a big thing here, but in some tropical kind of toilet arrangement, it can be impossible to use a toilet if you take that super strictly. And if here it's fairly rare, and I sometimes take delight in getting that fellow out, because it's obviously a good intention and the feeling of having saved the life, and maybe even overcoming a little bit of some yucky feeling for that is quite uplifting. But there can be situations. I remember in Sri Lanka, in the kuti I lived, I had these hohopata. You know the hohopata? These little like sandflies, hohopata.
Yes.
Now, they're very tiny, but they're hurting more than mosquitoes because they don't seem to have the anesthetic like mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are very kind. They apply an anesthetic before they bite you. Seriously. As it would hurt much more. No? But these ones don't. And sometimes, maybe this is why they're called hohopata, because they are hopping and bite you in a dozen times till they finally settle down in one spot. And I had maybe 30 in the average around me in the kuti all the time. Unless I go under the mosquito net in my bed, and very difficult to go in there without having some coming in. So it was quite an exercise in endurance and patience. But in the evening, when I would put on my little light, which is also the light for the shrine, which I use to get some light in the kuti, it's just oil with a little wick. They would fly into that. Quite a few of them. And there's already a difficult decision. Why do you put the lamp on and you know the insects are flying into it? But in this case, there was insects which were giving me so much of a headache. I got major doubts in my mind. Why do I put this lamp on now? I think the most important thing is to work very hard on the clear-cut intention. That is a main foundation, and particularly once it comes to insects, and then these kind of beings where you can accidentally even and so easily kill them. If you push that too far with negligence, it may become impossible. I mean, the Jain order, which already started about the same time as the Buddha, although they don't have quite an unbroken tradition like the Buddhist Sangha, but there were already a kind of Jain teachings in the Buddha's time. And they tried to minimize even non-intentional killing by wearing a mask, a face, that they don't breathe in insects, and by sweeping the path in front of them. Now, the Buddha never taught that. There's one sutta in Udana where the Buddha describes, or the Buddha sees, huge amounts of insects flying into the torches which were put up in the monastery. It's not reported that he told everyone to extinguish the torches, but he made an Udana. I don't have that one by heart, about the beings dropping into their own destructions by being misled. And he didn't lay down rules for the monks, how we have to avoid negligence to insects, that we should always walk with a light at night or something like that. So, as it is impossible otherwise to live, I think it's important to stay focused on not to do it intentionally. And I think the other one I would put more under a deliberate practice of compassion. Now, how far do you go now? Not so much to preserve your precept, but as an additional act of kindness and protecting and looking after other beings. I would see it more like not so much under keeping the precept, but these whole questions now, how much do you try to avoid even slight negligence for small insects? I would see that more as a practice. Now, how much additional compassion do you want to practice? But it can be great fun to save an insect. So good on you for trying with a grasshopper. You didn't mean to feed him to the magpies. Okay, is there any more? As we had a little discussion on animals. So please be kind to the worms and magpies and grasshoppers and tigers and kangaroos and koalas and cane toads. And if we can do that, then hopefully we can also be kind to fellow human beings.